Welcome to Stranger Things in the 1980s. My name is Vince Locke. I am your host. In this podcast, my guest and I take deep dives into the Upside Down, where we analyze each episode of the Netflix series along with related movies and books, and examine them in the context of 1980s America. In this episode, I'm rejoined by all of my previous guests for a roundtable talk about the season 1 finale, The Upside Down, and the whole first season of Stranger Things. Hey everyone, Vince here. Before we get into this episode, I just want to say that any financial support you can throw our way would be greatly appreciated. Because this podcast is based on a college course and its primary purpose is to be educational, I don't want to commercialize it. I feel strongly that knowledge and education should not be commercialized. However, I am more than happy to accept donations. Now, we're still going to make the podcast because we enjoy doing it, and we're always going to do it for free, so don't worry about that. But if you want to support us, you can click on the link in the show notes, and we'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to Stranger Things in the 1980s, everyone. This is not only the first season finale of the show that we're going to be discussing, this is our first season finale for this podcast. So we're going to do not only a discussion of this particular episode, which is The Upside Down, but we're also going to talk about the first season as a whole. I just want to welcome back everyone who is joining me. And again, go back and introduce yourselves, tell us who you are and what you do. And I'm going to go around my screen in clockwise and have you do that. So, Christina.
All right. Well, I am Christina Clerck-Szilagyi. I'm an historian and I'm an adjunct professor and a history communicator. Grew up in the 80s, loving Stranger Things, getting into the political analogies that are going on there. It's really good.
Jason.
Hello, I'm Jason Szilagyi. I am also a historian and also a history communicator. Grew up in the 80s watching a lot of the movies and TV shows that are referenced in Stranger Things, so it's a nice little callback to the past.
Yes, it is. Glenn.
Hello, I'm Glenn, librarian in Flint, Michigan. I also enjoy Stranger Things and the show as well, but also
is there anyone out here
things that are strange. I like.
Is there anyone out here who's going to be like, no, screw this show,
beach.
man, I hate it.
Yeah.
But Glenn,
that's your season 2 idea right there. You got to get this.
Oh yeah.
You got to have a counterpoint. Like I hate
play
this show.
that part for you if I knew ahead
sucks.
of time.
Okay. So Glenn, we've known each other a long time. I can attest to the fact that you do like Stranger Things in general. Brian.
Brian, I live in Bloomington, Indiana, not far from Hawkins, of course. And I also, as a child of the 80s, really dig the show and enjoy what they're up to. And as somebody who loves to dig into pop culture, I love to look at all those reference points and pick all of that apart. I also am an enthusiast of Stranger Things, the show, and also in life in general.
And Amee.
I'm Amee Schmidt. I'm an English professor that I'm now in Marshalltown, Iowa. Recent transfer over here, but originally from Michigan. And I teach literature, and I love thinking about Stranger Things from the perspective of literary analysis. It's just a ton of fun. And just an idea for the counter argument season has got to be season 4. My niece came to me at our vacation last weekend and said, "Did you finish season 4?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I need to vent to you about that." So there's definitely some things that about season 4 that are not really great going with the Gen Z population at the moment.
Interesting, because
Yeah.
I loved it.
I mean, yeah, I did not.
I
like
thought it was
season
great,
3.
but she was all up in arms about it. So it's a very
Interesting.
interesting topic. Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought
didn't
season
like
3
season-
was the weakest one. But,
yeah.
I agree.
but I do have a
Se-
couple problems with season 4, but we'll get there eventually.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything that you really want to talk about to start? Thoughts about the season, grievances about the season, or about this episode?
I spent a little bit of time doing some comparisons between the first and final episode. I don't know if we want to do that first or last.
We can do
but
that, because I did notice a few things that sort of like gives a roundness to the season.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of repetition, like very, very explicit repetition that happened. So the thing that stood out to me the most is, and it's the most explicit, are the start and end D&D games. Right. In both sets of games, we have, a big monster coming out at the end of the game. We have Will choosing to attack with a fireball. And only in the last game is he successful. So that's the only major difference. We have a slightly different end monster, but they're both, sort of larger monsters, which I thought was pretty interesting.
I will say about the whole fireball, there is a difference in that. In the first episode, Will isn't sure exactly what to do. He's not very confident about his action, and ends up throwing his dice off the table. Whereas in the final episode, he does ask, "Should I do a fireball?" And everyone's like, "Yeah." And he does it quite confidently and succeeds. Yeah,
I agree. And that shows, obviously that's character growth, right? That's what we're seeing there. The one that didn't occur to me until this morning is the elevator at Hawkins' lab.
Yes.
In the first episode of the season, we have a researcher who goes into that elevator and is frantically pushing the button to get in and frantically pushing the button to close it. And then the Demogorgon is in the elevator and supposedly kills him. In the final episode, we see Hopper frantically trying to get inside of that elevator and frantically then trying to close the elevator, although Hopper succeeds. But the tension there, I think, is elevated because what we see in that first episode. So I thought that was pretty fascinating.
And that's the teaser opening of the first episode.
Yeah. Yep. So I don't have much else in terms of parallels, but I have a couple of interesting things that I'm trying to figure out. In season 1, episode 1, the buyer's dog is a huge character and this huge alarm system, and then the dog disappears.
I was wondering about that. What happened to the dog?
I don't know. So the dog does show up when they are searching for Will in the Upside Down. The dog actually is searching for Will in Castle Byers, and we see the dog one time, and then other than that, the dog is completely gone, and I don't know why the dog has disappeared, because it was such an important indicator of the presence of the Demogorgon. And then we switch entirely to this electrical presence. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. But the dog does reappear at the very end.
Yeah.
When they're having the Christmas dinner.
I don't know why or where the dog, because I can't help but think, like, while Joyce is hanging up all those lights and being a crazy person, where's the dog? And it was, I don't know. I think that probably was a writer's mistake or a cut that they didn't think of, right?
I suspect there was more of a continuity error, but that did occur to me after I've reviewed and re-seen this several times. Hey, where'd the dog go?
And then something that I want to continue going on, and I know we think of Eleven as the protagonist, as certainly one of the heroes in the group, but her body count starts in episode 1. She kills 2 people at the diner.
Yeah.
And her body count sort of continues exponentially from there.
Yeah.
When I first started watching it, this is significant, I guess, because when I first started watching, I was thinking about Eleven as being pseudo innocent until until season 2, when she sort of goes off the beaten path and we start thinking of her as, as sort of the phoenix, right? And she sort of sees this dark side of herself, but she has killed well before she finds her sister. So kind of another interesting thing when you go back through and think about the first series as a whole, that, she isn't so innocent, right?
It does seem to like escalate throughout the following seasons as well, that there is this darkness that is within her from the beginning.
I mean, she is created as a weapon.
Yes.
That's her purpose. So, I mean, she's doing what she's taught to do.
Exactly. Look at her upbringing.
Yeah.
Look at who raised
I guess
her.
in a sense that makes her somewhat innocent, because she's more like programmed, if you will.
And also in her defense, every time she kills, it's in defense of herself or her friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she does restrain herself from killing others in season 1, like the young boy, she breaks his arm, makes him pee his pants instead of killing him. She's, kind of tempers, right, her powers, I think, when necessary, but
makes him wish he was dead rather than
yeah, right.
Yeah, and one other thing that I did notice is the first scene in each episode parallels each other, that it begins on a star field, and then the camera sort of pans down to the lab, which I think I mentioned before comes straight out of E.T., because that's how E.T. begins as well. So yeah, a lot of parallels and that cyclical structure between the first and final episodes of the first season, which parallels, I think, the structure of the hero's journey, which is the idea that you have a hero who experiences this call to adventure, has to leave their home and go out and have these adventures in order to grow, and then return to their home and able to set right things that are wrong. So very deliberate, I'm sure it is. Other thoughts?
The couple of film references that were very explicit stuck out for me, because there were references in the dialogue and some of the sequences also. That Thing poster shows up again.
Yeah.
Some of those scenes toward the end also had a vibe of the Thing to me, with like the fire and people running around in the lab areas and looking very much, I don't know, it very much had that look to me. The one that was a little earlier in the episode, though, was that, as there with the interaction with the Demogorgon was very much like Jaws adjacent. Like there's right down to somebody saying like, "You son of a bitch," and there's Jaws on the wall. The poster was on the wall.
I was going to mention that
as well.
Yeah, when they do summon the Demogorgon into the buyer's house, they run into Will's bedroom where the Jaws poster is. And, they know that how do you attract it? It's with blood, just like a shark.
Yeah, I'd say another scene that really stuck out was Will being kind of cocooned into the wall, very, very alien-esque.
Yes, so many alien references and parallels here. Let's talk about those.
There's even an egg.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
See here, this is what differentiates people who saw these movies in the 80s and people like me who saw them later, because my reference was a movie that was referencing Alien itself, which was the first X-Files movie.
Oh,
made me think about Scully in the Thing, and of course it was because I saw that before I saw Aliens. So
now that you mentioned that, yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, what are some of the alien parallels? There is the empty egg in the Upside Down. That I think screams alien.
Yep. There's Will cocooned into the wall.
Right,
which kind of the tube in his mouth.
Yes, which
similar
if I
to
recall,
not quite a face hugger, but
Yes. If I recall though, the Alien movie, the cocoons, that was a deleted scene. It wasn't in the original theatrical production.
Yeah, I was thinking of Aliens though, the second one, where they're coming in. But yeah, it was it was interesting that they threw that in there, because you see the ones who had been eaten before you get to Will, and it's like, okay, he's next.
Yes. And Will is sort of intubated in a very similar way, like the chest burster.
Yeah.
Any other parallels you noticed?
I would say the Christmas dinner scene is not quite as abrupt as the Alien dinner scene.
I hadn't thought about it, but now that you mention it,
yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. That's
because he goes in the bathroom, and then that little Demogorgon,
Little thing.
you know, he
Yeah.
pukes it up, and then he has the flashback where
Mhm.
he's back for a second in the Upside Down, and then it's
Yes.
normal.
So
And
yeah,
then-
he does cough up that slug, which we don't know at this point that it's.
Oh, whoops!
It's going to
Spoiler.
evolve.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm sure the audience knows, but when we first saw this, we didn't know what the significance of the slug was going to be. He just coughs up a slug.
Yeah.
We saw something similar before when 11 found Barb's body. There was a slug climbing out of her mouth. So I think we're meant to make that connection. But why is it that Will doesn't tell anyone about this, do you think?
That's the thing. I don't know if he's too traumatized that he wants to even he just wants to go move past it, and so he won't say
Yeah.
anything, or if he wasn't even really aware that he did that. And coming
I
back, you
hadn't
know,
thought of it that way.
maybe
Yeah.
he saw the Upside Down, but he didn't realize that, he threw this slug up. So
Right.
maybe a little bit of it was control, that he, that he
So
wouldn't remember it.
yeah, when I look back at this episode and I think about the first time that I watched it, I got a real sense of like maybe he was somehow brainwashed, because when he comes to in the hospital, he's also sort of almost oblivious to the fact that, he has just experienced this massive
Right.
trauma.
Mhm.
And then when he seems kind of nonchalant about the fact that he pukes up the slug and sort of flashes back to the Upside Down. And so when I first watched it, and before having seen subsequent seasons, I was thinking, maybe he's now like part of, maybe he's gone bad because he's been down there. That was really a sense that I got from it.
There is a strong feeling of just being sinister in that scene, or at least that's how I felt.
Oh yeah.
of
I
course,
read it
later
as I know this might say more about me than the show, but I read it as guilt. I'm sure he heard about everything that everybody had to do to save him, and the idea of having to put anybody through that again, or to make them think that it's not over.
That's
Yeah.
kind of what I was thinking too. It's like, well, I mean, he probably doesn't want to worry anyone.
Yeah.
I got a strong sense of that, but at the same time, and that's what confused me, because I'm like, okay, that seems right, that seems plausible, but at the same time, there's something, and the way it's presented, I think, with the music and the lighting gives it that sinister edge to it.
Mm.
So, I mean,
Well,
I don't
and
think it just necessarily has to be one or the other. I think it's probably a combination of factors there.
I
Yeah.
think there's this feeling with him, like if he talks about it, it becomes real again.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Just, it's kids are very good at avoidance.
Yes.
So I think it's, him avoiding it by, I'm not going to tell anybody about this because then I don't want to go down this road again.
Right. And there are, I think, sort of overtones to Poltergeist there with Carol Ann returning from her traumatic experience on the other side. And the point is made, she doesn't remember what happened, even though there are hints that she actually does, and she's putting on an act.
There's so much Spielberg in this show.
Yes.
Poltergeist, Jaws shows up over and over again.
Yes.
E.T.
E.T. Yes.
I was watching Jaws the other day and I noticed that the sheriff patch is almost identical to Hopper's.
Is it?
Yeah.
Nice. Nice
Okay.
touch.
We will discuss Jaws when we get to the third season because of the whole 4th of July aspect of it. But yeah, I hadn't made that connection. But going back to Aliens, there's another sort of alien parallel, which is when Joyce and Hopper go into the Upside Down and they're wearing the hazmat suits.
Yeah.
It reminds me so much of when the alien crew go to the alien planets in their spacesuits, and it's all like a foggy, dark place. And I'm like, okay, there's a definite visual parallel to what's happening with Alien here.
Yeah, and the fact that it's, the scientist who's telling them when they're getting ready to go in there, it's toxic.
Yes.
And then the question of, if it's toxic, how do we know that Will is alive?
Right.
And it's the thing that's actually keeping him alive.
Yes. Other thoughts? or anything that you just really want to talk about?
The hazmat suits make me think of Chernobyl, particularly the HBO's Chernobyl, but
Mhm.
you know, the thing itself. And I was anticipating them bringing Chernobyl into, I can't remember if it was season 3 or season 4, that was 86. And I was surprised that they didn't. And I know I'm just getting ahead of things, but the
Yeah.
hazmat suits.
I just, to make a little aside here, one thing that I really enjoy about the show and the way it progresses from season to season is each season is set during a certain holiday of a certain year in a certain season. So the first season, of course, is Christmas, 83, so winter of 83. Second season is Halloween of 84, so a fall holiday. Third season, 4th of July, 85. And then the fourth season is spring of 86. And if you look at the history, what happened in spring of 86 was the Chernobyl disaster. I was positive that they were going to deal with that in some way in fourth season. And I was really disappointed that they didn't.
Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, they give the dates at some point and it's just ahead of it.
Yeah.
That they, so.
Yeah.
Maybe
Especially
we'll
since
talk about it next time.
Exactly. So especially since the Soviet Union and Russia was such a prominent part of seasons 3 and season 4, I was sure that's where they were going, but they didn't. So obviously I've got several questions here about this particular season. So let's talk about these a little bit. Is Dr. Brenner sincere in what he says? In his interactions with both the Wheeler family and with Joyce, he's constantly talking about how he's trying to protect people.
I think, okay, so Brenner is probably the most complicated character to read because Matthew Modine's acting, right?
It's like a good performance.
It's really great performance. And I feel like we talked about this before. Matthew Modine really felt like he wasn't being creepy.
Yes.
But he's creepy. Like he is just creepy.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Brenner, I think, is trying to protect 11. We're going to do wildly speculative percentages when I say like 85% of what he wants to protect in 11 is his investment in her as a tool. But also there's a sense of fondness that he has for her. And so maybe he's got about, 5% wanting to protect her because he is fond of her as like a daughter. And then the other 10% is complete and total. I need to get her back to protect myself from being found out. Does he want to protect things? Absolutely. Does what he have to do in order to protect the things he really wants mean that he has to try to protect Hawkins? Probably. But I don't think that he's at all interested in, he doesn't have any sort of altruistic motives, right? At all. That's my take.
No. Definitely not.
Yeah, I get a strong sense that he is very sociopathic and he isn't, as you say, altruistic. Is that just our reading of him as the villain, though?
We're only talking about season 1 and the way that we see him in season 1, then then I don't think so. I think that what we see of him, his actions are very much leading on this, on the sociopathy spectrum, right? He's definitely
he really does not seem to care about other people. This is where it gets a little confusing to me, because I did see an interview with him in which he talks about trying to get 11 to kill the cat. And he says that was a test for her. He did not want her to kill the cat, which I think is bullshit, because he's very upset when she doesn't kill the cat, but kills his henchmen, and he has no problem with that. So when he talks about 6 people have gone missing, he tells this to Joyce, I'm trying to help it so that other people don't go missing. I don't think he really cares about those people who've gone missing. He wants to stop other people from going missing because that means that he's back in control of the situation.
That's what I was thinking too. I think all of his this motivation is not people focused at all. And I think that I almost thought of his dynamic with Eleven in this season as kind of like maybe like Dr. Frankenstein and the monster, like just this sort of, I care about you enough because I want, because it's a monument to myself, right? If you could do the things that you are meant to do, then that makes me look good or feel good about myself. And I think that's really what his, at least, in this season, his motivation appears to be, is just to keep what he's doing on the down low, but highly successful.
So Dr. Brenner is a father figure. Looking at most of the adults here, they're all parents in some way. Are they good parents?
Oh my gosh, define a good parent. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
That had a different definition in the 80s than it does now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go with that.
80s terms or 2022 terms?
What did it mean in the 80s to be a good parent?
Your kid's alive at the end of the day.
Yeah, more or less. Your
Provide a
children are
house and
surviving.
food
They
and-
haven't hurt
Yeah.
someone else.
It's 10
Severely.
p.m.
Cool.
Do you know where your children are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, I mean, we've talked about this on other episodes too, but a lot of that, like, I think a lot of what was a quote unquote good parent in this time frame was really like keeping children out of danger, which is kind of ironic given the way that a lot of people parented in the 80s, which was just like, which you've
whatever.
also talked about a lot, which is just like you get on your bike at 8 o'clock in the morning, you come back for lunch, you come back for dinner, and then you're back when the street light's on, and who knows what the hell you've been doing all day. If it was really bad, your parents would hear about it, but for the most part, it's like, minor mischief. But I think that, that's definitely not, that would not be good parenting by a 2022 standard, or by most, by most rational people. I know a lot of, I know some of us like to, some of us from this generation like to be proud of that. I saw this really funny meme that was like, I don't want to fuck with those Gen Xers. They had to learn how to do everything on their own. Nobody was telling them what to do, giving them awards for.
Yeah, they're the
showing
real
up
fuck around and find out people.
Exactly. That's it. Yep. That's what I saw. So I think that it's, on the surface, it's probably seen as good parenting. It's funny that this is one of your things though, because the one thing I wrote down that's jumped out at me toward the end is that there's 2 last digs at what a shitty dad that Nancy's father is. Like he's shown it twice, like sleeping with a bowl of popcorn sitting on his lap, like just completely oblivious. And
let's look at each of them individually. So yeah, Ted Wheeler there. Is he a good dad?
No.
The
I bet
standards of the
he's
time.
never received a World's Best Dad t-shirt for Father's Day.
I'm going to disagree because
Good.
I assume
Let's get
he's-
into this.
I assume he's the breadwinner in the house. I can't
Yeah.
remember if the mother works.
She doesn't.
So, but
Doesn't
so
look
by
like
the
it.
standards of the time, he's a perfectly good father. He's given them a roof over their heads, food to eat,
Yeah.
some money. Now leave me the hell alone. Let me watch my TV show with my beer and popcorn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he does his job
Not saying that's
as a
right.
father.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just reading a book yesterday about like the changing dynamics of parenting and stuff. And people have taken to calling what that is as a provider and not a parent,
yes.
because it's very much like removed psychologically from what's going on.
Right.
It's just a matter of like, well, I did the stuff, I made the money. Here's the things that you can do with it.
And
Now
I
I'm
think
done.
it's in the 80s that these sort of definitions and expectations start to change. But, looking at the traditional concept of what a parent or what a father is, he is fulfilling
father.
his obligations. Right?
Yeah.
He's there.
And
I do think that
Yep.
he fails pretty explicitly a couple of times when Mrs. Wheeler looks to him specifically to do something, in terms of, like correction for the children, and he just, what did I do?
Yeah.
So
Oh my
there's
God.
definitely some serious failures that Mr. Wheeler has.
So he is not a disciplinarian.
No, not
which
at all.
would have
No.
been part of the dad's job. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I mean,
in
there
that way,
was-
he's like the sitcom dad.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Dun,
probably
dun,
how
dun.
it's written. That's like definitely
Absolutely. Yeah.
especially the 80s, like
Yeah.
pre-Huxtable era. I think we had a couple of moments there where the dad wasn't an idiot. My children are starting to watch like scripted shows now, and it's a real hellscape. Like every dad is a dummy. They don't know how to turn on the faucet or do laundry.
Mhm.
They stand there with their hands
Yep.
up in the air, just like
Glenn, you
Let's
were saying
reinforce
myself.
gender norms.
With the Wheelers, there is a lot of information given though. It is mentioned that he's much older than she is.
Yeah.
And
That's
that
evident,
he
yeah.
had money, and that's why she married him.
Hmm.
Parents liked him too because he was a little bit older and already had money.
Yeah.
It's also mentioned that he sleeps in that chair.
Yeah.
So that's
That's-
also
and-
telling the marriage a little bit possibly
yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
a very traditional marriage
yeah.
Right.
as well.
Mr. Wheeler, undercover victim. We're just
So
yeah.
yeah.
No.
He's,
But yeah, I think it's in the second
He's
episode where
unhappy,
Mike
too.
makes the joke about, this is the lazy boy. This is where my dad sleeps.
Sleeps.
yeah.
And we
Yeah,
do
and
see
we're-
that.
We're past the point, like, my first instinct hearing that was she doesn't want any more children. She kicked him out of the bedroom.
Uh-huh.
But we're into the era of birth control being available.
Right.
So,
Uh-huh.
maybe not as used as much, but
Yeah. Well, with him being older, also, it might be one of those deals where
True.
he's like, "Yeah, I don't think so," or "That's too progressive for my taste."
That's true.
I mean,
There
we're in Indiana
is-
in the 1980s. Trust me,
Yeah.
it feels like Indiana in the 1980s when I get outside of Bloomington. Right now.
yeah.
This
Are
is
they Catholic? I can't remember
I-
if they ever say anything like that.
they don't really discuss religion
Yeah, I
at
didn't think
all,
so.
or very obliquely. But with the Wheelers, I mean, you can tell that that is a conservative social viewpoint. And we get into this in the second season because that's election 84 season,
Mhm.
and they're very much Republicans.
Yeah, my autoplay kicked me over into season 2 when I was watching it,
Uh-huh.
and that was one of the first things that just hit me right in the face.
So Karen Wheeler, is she a good mom?
I think she's probably the best parent that we see in terms of like her capabilities and her concern for her
Mm.
children, because she says to both Michael and Nancy in the season, I don't know if it's in this episode, but you can talk to me. Like, I
Mhm.
want you to talk to me,
Yeah.
right? And she doesn't always know where her kids are, but again, we're talking about, parenting in the 1980s. But in terms of a caring parent, I feel like she's definitely one of the better ones that we see in this
She
season.
does reach out to her kids.
She does.
Yeah. And in fairness to these poor folks that we're kneeling on, like not knowing what their kids are doing all day, they live in a small town. They could probably bike from one
Yeah.
side of it to the other in like 15 minutes.
Exactly.
It's not like
Yeah.
they live in a major metropolitan area and their kids are
Yeah.
just running wild in the city in the 80s, and who knows what they're getting into. So there's probably, I mean, they're, to a degree, I'm sure they're just conforming to the norms of like the community and not just
Yeah.
the era.
And
So-
so, yeah, very much of that time and place, I think they are the model kind of parents.
Yeah.
I would
I mean, 'cause
argue that
people-
Karen Wheeler's not a good mom.
I
She-
wouldn't have gone so far as to say that she's good, but I don't know if I'd go, I don't know. I just felt like she was kind of,
She is
C+.
really neglectful of Mike and really meddlesome when it comes to dealing with Nancy.
typical 80s parenting. The
I
boys
and
can
I would say,
figure it out
yeah,
on
going
their
back to
own.
the
I don't want the
time
girl to
frame.
get pregnant.
Yeah.
I have a
That's
teenage
where I was
daughter.
thinking too.
Long as they don't get pregnant, the boys can run wild. Nobody makes the connection there
Yeah.
that maybe if you gave the boys more direction, you wouldn't have to worry about some of the
Mhm.
other things.
So yeah, I mean, for the
Well-
time period, I think she is again the model of a good mom. But if you look at the relationships with the kids,
Well, I think that
I have
that's-
problems there.
I think that her mother relationship with the kids is actually incredibly natural because she has a younger one.
Hmm.
Your focus will go to that one because that's the one that you need to get to survive. I mean, the other ones are older. I don't
Right.
mean that to sound callous, but the other ones are older.
No,
So
that's-
she succeeded in keeping them alive at least long enough. And so she does have a little one. And that's who she's going to
Yes.
focus on. And that's what mothers do.
Yeah.
They focus on the youngest one.
At the same time, the point is made that she is invading Nancy's privacy. You know, she picks the lock on her door. She goes in without knocking.
I mean, I was a
That
step
seems
parent.
completely normal to me. As I mean,
Yeah.
what my relationship with my mother was exactly the same way, and it just seemed normal, right? Like my mother came in the bathroom, you know, when I was in the shower. It didn't seem abnormal to me at all. As for her hands-offness with Mike, she knows the nature of her child, and she just assumes he's not going to get in trouble because they play board games in the basement. They all basically live at her
Yeah,
house.
that's fair.
She kind of knows where they are almost all the time, so she doesn't worry about him as much. And Nancy's a teenage girl, and that's where her focus is on the baby and on her teenager who could be having a baby if she's not nosy.
And yet Mike is the one who's in the greater danger
Oh, right.
than Nancy is.
Is usually the case.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but that's just how it is. Like there's a lot of parenting that doesn't happen for boys.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to get to a point where we're realizing that is a deficiency that we need to try to correct.
I mean, clearly
that's what I'm reading a lot lately. Since I have a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, full disclosure. So these are always concerns that I have. They're ongoing for me. So,
you know, she hasn't read any of those reports telling her how evil and horrible D&D is. Otherwise, she'd be down there right then to make sure Mike was not playing that game anymore. Because the local PTA, whoever, is telling her, you know, that's how those kids get caught up with Satanism.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll get there when we get to season 4. Because that's when the satanic panic really sets in.
And surely in that community, that would be a major issue. Yeah. They'd be very worried that the devil was going to take them.
Well, let's look at Joyce now. We've talked a little bit about the parallels or the duality between Karen Wheeler and Joyce Byers. Is Joyce a good mom?
I think so.
I think she's doing her best. I think that parents in that situation often get a lot of shit, even though they're doing their best. And I think that she's trying hard. She wants to be, she interacts with her children. She cares about what they're up to. She fights really hard to get her son back when something has happened to him. Yeah. I mean, I think she's a good parent.
I mean, not an easy thing to do in that time period is to kick the father of your children out, which she does in season 1. We see her do it again. We don't know how they divorced in the first place, but she does kick him out to say, you're not a good person to have in my children's lives. And even though it means that her life raising her children is harder, she still opted to be a single parent. She relies a bit on Jonathan, but also, you know, she's raised him in a way to be a responsible human, which I also think is a testament to how she is as a mother.
Now, Chrissy, you and I discussed this a little bit, the way Joyce would have been regarded at the time. And we've related this to Stranger Danger a little bit. From the time perspective, she would have been considered a bad mom because she's divorced, she's a single mother, and her kid disappears. Yeah.
And keeping in mind, too, that I don't know when the laws changed in Indiana, but we're still in an era where it's not exactly legal to beat your wife and children, but it's not exactly illegal either. We are still a decade out from marital rape being illegal, you know, so, you know, we don't know what the abuse was, so we'll leave it there. But the idea of a woman kicking a man out and being on her own, as opposed to dealing with those things that a lot of people would just say, that's your lot in life. You married him, now you have to deal with it. That's what you do, you know.
It was the woman's job to keep the husband happy and raise the kids.
And her being at work and things happening to the kids while she's at work. Forget about the fact that you know, all the other kids who don't have working mothers get equally into danger. You know, that's because there is this freedom that the kids have to do whatever. she would have been, and she is treated like, I don't think pariah is the right word because that's a little bad, a little worse than I want to say, but she's definitely an outsider.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you do get a sense that people within this community don't approve of her.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Definitely, she's definitely a progressive woman for the time period of the
Mhm.
show.
Yes.
But I also think that most of the audience members today recognize her as a good parent, right? So yeah, it's really interesting juxtaposition there, right?
Yes.
Like how she's seen in the show for the time period of the show and the way the audiences view her.
And I think that's one thing that is really interesting is that we identify with like Joyce or have so much sympathy for Joyce now and less so for like Karen. And yet in the time period, those roles would have been reversed. Lonnie, what about him? I think we can all agree he's not a good parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember, but I want to say that Jonathan called him a douchebag sometime, and that is pretty much the appropriate word, I think.
Yeah. So even for the time period, he wouldn't have been a good.
He's not good even by the 80s yardstick. He's not. He's not even trying.
So that just leaves Hopper.
So what we see of him in the flashbacks of him as a biological father, everything looks like he was really an amazing father. Not only a provider, but also a parent, like a co-parent, reading stories to his daughter, playing with her, that sort of thing. And then also he takes this very, very small role, but he starts to take a role as a parent to 11 at the end of season 1. And so I think that, that gives us some confidence in him and what he's going to be able to do as a sort of adoptive parent when we see him do things in season 2. So I think Hop's pretty great. Obviously, he's got to work on the example he gives to children. I mean, because right now he's not exactly leading by example with his lifestyle. But again, we see
he's got
that
some
start
anger
to change.
issues.
Yeah. Well, and the drinking and the drugs and whatever else. But we see a lot of that start to change very, very, very slightly in the last few episodes of season 1 because he's preoccupied with trying to find Will and do his job, do what's right for his community. So.
He's a stand-up guy,
Really
ultimately.
And you do get, at least I got the impression that he was self-medicating because of the death of his daughter.
Yeah.
And that wasn't something that he did before. And once he has a daughter again in 11, it's not something he needs to do.
And he does say early in the season, I think it's in the second episode, that he does feel cursed. And of course, we don't know this at this point, but we could reasonably infer that he's a Vietnam vet, which is confirmed in the second season. And we don't know exactly what happened with his daughter. We're only told, I think, in the first episode that his daughter died. So he's coming from a position of trauma.
But in the flashbacks, we see them in the hospital.
In the first episode, we don't know, but by the final episode,
all we know in the very beginning is that he's lost his daughter, but we don't know the specifics until.
So he's coming from a position of trauma.
Considerable trauma.
We get the origin of his bracelet. The blue bracelet was his daughter's hair tie. He starts wearing it after she loses her hair.
I didn't catch. I saw the bracelet, but I didn't catch the connection.
Look at that.
I same as Chrissy. I keep noticing the bracelet in the later episodes of season 1, but I don't remember where it comes from. Like I never caught it before. Now you're gonna make me watch it again.
It's featured prominently in certain shots and certain episodes, mostly in like the first and second episodes, and then we see it again prominently in especially this last episode. The first time we see him with his daughter Sarah, she has them in her hair.
Totally missed that.
Is the story allegorical, do you think?
Is 11 a Christ figure? I mean, certainly until she comes back, we can assume, and the fact that she does come back, I guess, makes it even more. So that's getting into next season.
I discussed it a little bit in the last episode, but the part where she's in the pool trying to find Will, you know, she's lying in the water, she's wearing this frilly dress that kind of billows out around her. I see that as baptismal imagery. So I don't know if I'm just reading into that, but that's immediately what comes to mind every time I see that.
Were you raised Catholic?
I wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this last time I was on, the idea that with her shaved head and the way that she's almost leading the way into doing this, she does remind me of Joan of Arc quite a bit, especially those images from the old French films of Joan of Arc. But yeah, she does give off that Joan of Arc look to me.
So yeah, there is that. It's set at Christmas time, and 11 sacrifices herself for her friends. And say Jesus does say there's no greater gift than to sacrifice oneself for one's friends. And I'm paraphrasing that. I don't remember the exact phrasing.
Paraphrasing.
It should have been said at Easter.
And I was sure they were going to do that in season 4, but they didn't.
Yeah, that surprised me as well.
Well, we don't get like you said before, we were talking about, we don't get a very religious vibe. So Easter is one of those things, either you celebrate it or you don't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, Christmas is a little more mass. Yeah, or like there are plenty of people who aren't Christian who celebrate Christmas, but Easter's a little more.
Yeah, so there are no really explicit references to religion in the show until season 4 when the Satanic Panic comes in.
Yeah,
but
I think that's, for me, that's why I don't feel like it's meant to have much religious connotation. I think one of the things that, I mean, from my own memory of the 80s is that we used to like to weaponize religion, but we didn't really like to use it for things that were good or hopeful.
Well, that
a lot
hasn't
of the time.
changed.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I like, you got to tell me, I live in Indiana. So but yeah, I mean, it's definitely something where people will pull that tool off the shelf if it's going to suit their needs, but it's the continual practice of it is not there so much. So to me, I didn't think of that. I mean, those are, but they also remind me of Hero's Journey content, like just more so that I think that's where my head went with it more so than like a religious thing.
I mean, the thing is, though, you can take the New Testament as religious text, or you can take it as literary foundation for the quote unquote Western world. You know, I just got done reading. Oh, shoot. This is going to be really niche, but follow me on it. Okay. The Star Trek novel series that went on after all of the shows were over, that's been going on for the last 20 some odd years. They had to wrap it up in such a way that it fit in with the new shows that are coming out. So there had to be, because they didn't want to do what Star Wars did, right? The end of the last book, spoiler without a lot of detail, Wesley ends up basically becoming a Christ figure.
Okay.
Right. And I was talking with the authors on my other podcast, Infinite Diversity, a Star Trek Universe podcast. We were talking with the authors, and I asked, did you intend that? And he hadn't even thought of it until I mentioned it. So it is that ingrained in the society. You don't have to be a religious person to have that in your head.
Yes.
But it does go in with the hero's journey. It does go in with a lot of other bits of the literature.
It is very much an archetypal symbol. Yeah, that sort of transcends or goes across cultural lines.
And of course, I come at everything through a psychoanalytic lens, and for me, the water is always the subconscious, right? So I see it as sort of just the representation, and a very, I don't know, literal representation of her delving into her subconscious and finding that information there. So.
And the upside down, because of course, and Glenn pointed this out earlier, way back when, talking about Jaws and the Jaws poster. Half of it is the upside down part of it too is, setting it at Christmas time and the winter when, the natural year is going into darkness and then coming back out into light. So that's part of that cyclical structure as well. Jason?
Yeah, I was going to say, I have been thinking about this the last few minutes, but with 11, with her sacrifice at the end of this episode, it's almost along the lines of Obi-Wan Kenobi sacrificing himself with the Death Star.
Nice.
The idea that he's something, he had abilities that, Luke and Han and Leia and all the other ones in the group didn't have, or they didn't know they had. But the point that it's,
and there is
opening them up to a whole new experience. There's
Right.
there's another thing beyond, the
taking
norm.
your first step into a larger world.
Yes.
Yes. There is a strong Star Wars presence in this show. And that's mentioned in this particular episode. References to Lando and Yoda come back around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I
If
have to
it's-
say Obi-Wan is a Christ figure too, but I'm just, let's put that.
Or at least Ewan McGregor is.
Both, yeah.
You ever seen those
Forgot about
pictures of
that,
Ewan McGregor? People think he looks like Jesus. Okay. So if it's not allegorical from a religious perspective, is it allegorical of anything else? Is it a metaphor for cancer?
That's interesting.
Because cancer is a theme which carries through from the very beginning. When the boys first find 11, I think it's Dustin who asks, what happened to your hair? Do you have cancer? And then what happens with Will when he's recovered? There is the very clear parallel between him and the death of Sarah, Hopper's daughter.
I think so too, along the lines of the upside down. When it shows up, wherever it shows up, or it breaks through, it corrupts whatever it is that it touches in the
Cancer.
physical, physical world. And it's just this wound that could keep growing.
Yes.
And no matter how much, they're trying to stop it, they might close it off in one spot, but, there's all these other areas where it's showing up where no one is expecting it. And anyone it touches, for the most part, it kills.
That's really interesting, because then this allegory, this cancer allegory, would follow through every season, right? So this is, like you think you're in remission and then it comes back, and you think you're in remission and then it comes back. Sometimes it comes back with a different face or a different kind. That's awfully clever there, Vince Locke.
Yeah.
I wish I could take credit for it. I read it online somewhere. If it is cancerous or a metaphor for cancer, what is the cause of the cancer?
Corruption of human beings. Yeah. So Brenner, right? Like his greed, his desire to create something larger than life is what opened the cancer, right? So obviously, if we're talking 1980s, this is of course paralleling the quote unquote Department of Energy and the different kinds of mass pollution that we had in the 80s. Yeah.
Yes. And government malfeasance coming out of Watergate. And I did discuss in that episode on Firestarter, Stephen King very deliberately makes a reference to government corruption as being a cancer.
It's a very common phrase for that. I'm trying to think if is it in this season or one of the other ones where there's like that pit and it's
That's
supposed to
season
be
2.
Toxic waste or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. That's why as I was sitting here, I'm thinking through all of the seasons going, wow.
Yeah.
Cancer is a pretty good allegory right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, going back to the idea that we know, or we come to know, that Hopper is a Vietnam vet and his daughter died of cancer. Historically, we know that was a fairly common occurrence to soldiers who had been exposed to Agent Orange.
With Agent Orange,
But the
basically,
military's-
once it's in your system,
Right.
once it's in your system, it might not necessarily kill you immediately,
Right.
but it damages so many of your tissues, internal organs, DNA that, you know, you might survive for decades, but if you have children, they're hit with almost all of that damage almost immediately.
Right. And so that plays into Hopper's idea of being cursed. But also, if that is the case, and I think it's reasonable to reach that conclusion, that, you know, he was exposed to Agent Orange and carried that on to his daughter. He was exposed in his service to the government in a war that many people felt was unnecessary.
Do we know?
That's polite.
I'm trying to think. That's a polite way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other piece of that is that all of those things, those seeds were all planted in the 70s, which is one of the times when we, that's one of the eras, probably the most prominent era, where we really started to be very skeptical of the things that were going on in the government. And I mean, well, it's not, I mean, clearly, up until then, everything's going great, with slavery and women's rights and everything else. I don't know why we ever, I don't know what it was about the 70s that made us stop believing, but
televised
war.
Televised war.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely. Well, no, you're right, Glenn. That was a major component of it. I mean, people seeing what's going on over there made it did change a lot of hearts and minds. And it was, I mean, it was the first, I think arguably the first time we were in a conflict that a lot of people felt was unclear why we were involved and what, and the cost that the cost that we paid for that is massive. And I think that those, there's just a lot of that, I don't know, a lot of us coming to.
And we did talk about that in the Rambo episode that we discussed.
Yeah.
Really?
I can't believe I didn't get on my soapbox on that.
So in the 80s,
sorry, everybody.
Sort of those seeds from the 70s are really coming to fruition here.
Yeah.
So it starts with Kennedy, though. Yeah. I mean, if you want to look at when people start distrusting government, it's the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And it goes from there. And, it's 9 years later, you have Watergate. And of course, that then blows up everything. But it also, there's reactions going in two different directions. You have the people who say the government is corrupt and are disbelieving of what's going on there. And then you have the people who double down on it. And it's like, oh, we have to worship the military because of this. And we still do that now. There was a resurgence of that after the Trade Center and the Pentagon, and it all went in the wrong direction.
And in the show, Ted Wheeler does say, "This is our government, honey. We have to trust them. They're on our side." Yes.
Yeah, says the man who's reflective of the people who are in government for the most part.
Yes.
Yeah.
So of course.
Exactly.
And we made the point sometime in a previous episode where for a lot of people, younger generations, Vietnam and Watergate and even the Kennedy assassination is like ancient history. But in the 80s, it's very much in living memory. Yeah. So is the show an accurate representation of the 80s?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean,
oh, you kids.
Yeah, I don't remember either because I was born in 81, right? So my experience of the 80s was different than most. But in terms of this juxtaposition, right? Do we see an accurate representation of people's, we're going to call it naivete in the characters, particularly, of Nancy's family, right? Absolutely. And then do we see audiences recognizing that hypocrisy in today's audiences? Yeah, I think so. Right. So I don't think that the show is attempting to hide or even like obfuscate anything from 80s like government representations, right? I think it is trying to be rather honest about those representations.
Yeah, I was just saying in the background of this, you have the Reagan administration where on one hand, they're saying that they want peace, but they're breaking, multiple, strategic arms limitations treaties by, talking about a Star Wars defense. They're talking about how they don't deal with terrorists, and yet at the same time, they are selling weapons through Israel to the Iranians, while the Iranians are at war with the Iraqis in order to get American and other Western prisoners out of Lebanon, and then using the money for that to pay for a guerrilla war in Central America against communists there.
Yep.
So that idea of, we have to trust the government, nobody wants to believe at that time that the government is still going to pull shit like they did with Watergate. Or with Nixon, because Nixon's saying that he's not going to expand the war in Vietnam, and he's bombing the hell out of Laos and Cambodia. He's sending in more soldiers. It's like there's this reaction that Americans are like, no, we've gotten past Nixon, and so now everybody else who comes after him has learned their lesson in government. It's like, yeah, he showed them how to do it and blatantly lied to the American people, and American people will fall for it because they don't want to think that they're we don't ever want to think our own countries are the bad guys.
Right.
And not saying that we always are, but there are motives to push our culture over anybody else's.
And we don't like to think that we've been duped or fooled or anything like that, that we're dumb in some way.
Well, and right now we're dealing with this in like an internal battle, right? I mean, it's like within the confines of this country, there's people that think that there's, well, we don't need to get into all that. I think that statement's enough for now.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there's
it's the 80s all over again.
As far as the representation of the 80s, I mean, a lot of what I saw is pretty close to what's going on here. I mean, and it should track for me because I grew up in Michigan, and it's, it's a 1980s working class upbringing. And so, yeah, a lot of what those kids were up to, I didn't play D&D, but, a lot of the other stuff they were up to was like, I mean, that was very much similar to what we were doing all the time. And I feel like I saw somewhere that one of the criticisms I had seen posted or pointed at the show was that it was only, at least initially, I think people saw it as just kind of like a nostalgia trip, or it sometimes gets lumped into that space of like, it's just playing the greatest hits of the 80s. But I mean, I think the fact that we can rip it apart like this for, hours and hours, it kind of disproves that.
Well, let me reframe the question. If you look at the show in relation to other shows that depict the 1980s or other movies, do you think this is more accurate or does a better job or a worse job?
You're talking made after the fact.
Right.
Okay. So
let's say
give me some examples.
Ready Player One or The Goldbergs, or what was that movie J.J. Abrams did? Super 8, which technically is more 70s than 80s, but
I don't know. I haven't seen those.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't watch The Goldbergs. Sorry.
I think part of what Stranger Things does really well is it is telling us the story that takes place in the 80s without framing it as, hey, look, it's the 80s. By the way, I have the story. So it's not pushing it in your face.
Right.
There's no kids that are, wearing parachute pants and listen to Run DMC.
That's
purposely to make you think it's the 80s.
Early for that book.
That's the sense that I get is that these other pop culture 80s throwbacks are all about, let's see how many 80s
things we can
comments and things we can cram into the story.
Yeah, there's definitely an emphasis on weaving those elements into the story that they want to tell. Right. I think the distinction to me is that some of those other shows that you're talking about, the purpose, stated or otherwise, is to put as many 80s references as possible. And there's things with the 90s like that too. Like the first thing when you started talking that I thought of was the movie The Wedding Singer, which has all those every single thing in it is like this funny, they're like the guy in this band looks like Boy George, and the one guy drives the the Lambo, and so he's playing the Miami Vice theme, and there's no like purpose to any of it other than to make you laugh, which is fine. But
I need to rewatch that now.
What elevates this, I think, is that all of those things are there to do something bigger with the story. They're not just dropped in. It's not like somebody makes a joke about Run DMC or whatever just to do it.
That's what I think. This show feels more authentic in the sense that these 80s pop culture references are more organic. It's not so much we're throwing these in there just to show how 80s we are. We're doing it because it's necessary to the story, and the story is set in the 80s.
I think to add to that, necessary to the characters they're related to. So we talk specifically about, Jonathan and being sort of represented by those counterculture influences, right? The Clash, the Evil Dead, that those are, they're there and we see them, but they're not there without a purpose, right? They start to lead us to understanding characters and the way that they relate. And the same thing that with Nancy's books, right? So Nancy has all those Encyclopedia Britannicas, and she's doing her research about the animals in them. And I'm like, it's so, I remember those. We had those growing up.
Funkin' Wagnalls.
And they're not there just to be a plot device or something like that. They really are representative of who she is, right? Particularly in season 1, that she is very focused on knowing things and knowledge and sort of that she's got that Nancy Drew-ness about her, right? So, yeah, I agree.
I'm going to spin your question on its head for you.
Okay.
Does this show work as well set in any other time?
That's what I was thinking too. Does it work as a show?
Yeah, I think it would.
I mean, the details might change, but the story does not have it doesn't have to be at that time. And so that makes it more authentic feeling because it could be anytime.
Yes. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think you can't push it past high age of internet though. We're not gonna see kids on their bike sort of doing these spontaneous impromptu adventures. Because there's, particularly, 2005 plus, right? 2010 at least, where young kids are not, they're interacting, virtually on a much higher rate.
Yeah.
And I guess that goes to show you, because I was thinking going backward, not forward.
Oh, right.
So
for sure, backward I think works well. Yeah.
Sure. I think, I agree with you. I think that it could certainly work in the 90s. But I think that I really, just like a lot of stuff, people having cell phones would make a lot of things fall apart.
Joyce's phone getting zapped twice, right? That wouldn't, that's a major necessity for the story.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that the story works on its own. The 80s setting sort of informs the story, but the story is not about the 80s. And I think that's the important thing. So do you think the characters grow and evolve?
Definitely. My favorite character growth is Nancy, which of course comes directly after she loses her virginity, which, maybe a trope, but I don't care. It works really well. Her character growth in this season is astronomical and it's believable. And I like it a lot.
How do you feel about her ending up with Steve? Because that disappointed me the first time I saw that.
Absolutely. So the fact is, I know it doesn't last very long, but I see her ending up with Steve as a way to hang on to the innocence that she had before she literally experienced the upside down, right? She went face to face with a Demogorgon, and that's her trying to find comfort. She even just snuggles in to his arm, right? Like that's she's trying to be innocent again, and she just never will be.
And I think that's a good point that she does snuggle in to him, but for some reason, when she does that, it seems really awkward to me. I don't know if that's the performance or that's just the way I'm saying.
I think it's awkward. I think that they're all, all of them are at that point, at the end of this season, they're all like trying to convince themselves that we can go back to normal. They're all trying to, I think that's part of the reason that Will doesn't, it just covers up what he's up to by washing his hands. Like, oh, that sounds like a totally normal thing to do. And it's Christmas, and who doesn't want things to be normal at Christmas? Right. Those of us who don't have, who have things about the holidays that don't that make them not enjoyable.
Mhm.
Like, there's always that feeling of like, you want that time to be good and stress-free and
Mhm.
normal, if you will. So I mean, all of the characters are trying to do that. And I think that, Nancy, I mean, I think what happened, her awkward move into him just really kind of typifies what you were saying about her growth and development of just kind of like, maybe she's not, she feels like this, part of her is like, this is the thing to do right now. But I think that awkwardness is also kind of like, yeah, this isn't gonna, I can't unknow what I know,
Yeah, and I
whether
think-
that's Demogorgon wise or personal growth.
And I do think that shows personal growth too, because I think in a way, rather than going with emotions, she does know that loyalty is important. So there has to be some sort of still connection. I mean, it'd be strange if she was just like, oh, no, this guy over here now. You're like, well, she didn't grow. She didn't learn anything. I mean, there has to be a reason.
I mean, he killed the Demogorgon. Are you gonna break up with him right after that? Seriously.
So
Come on.
two things about
That's
that. Steve does a really amazing about face because he was a douchebag throughout the entire season. And then the final episode, he's really pretty cool.
Mhm.
And there becomes a running gag throughout the show about how often Steve gets his ass kicked. He
Mhm.
beats the Demogorgon.
Mhm.
That for me is redemption for Steve, right? Like he's literally just coming off of getting his ass beat by Jonathan, and he turns around and like he's looking for redemption. He's looking for a way to prove himself to Nancy and to prove himself to himself, and that's his redemption move, right? I'm gonna beat up a monster.
But
That
That
Nancy's
sounds very
also
old, Steve.
yeah. Nancy's also following her mother's example. Her mother married somebody safe, who
Mhm.
and they don't seem to have a very, let's say, outwardly loving relationship.
Mhm.
They don't express that. And so, cuddling awkwardly on the couch, she probably thinks is like, oh wow, this is so much more, I'm so much more in this relationship than I've ever seen my parents be.
Sure.
To be with Jonathan might not even occur to her as a possibility, not in a serious possibility.
Well, that whole scene when they're, it's Nancy and Steve and Jonathan fighting in the house, when they're doing the prep work for it, the only thing I could
Mhm.
think of was Nightmare on Elm Street, because you have Nancy getting ready to fight another monster and having to bring it into the real world in order,
Mhm.
away from the Upside Down where they have the advantage. And the fact that she took charge. I mean, she
Yes.
did not want to give
Yeah.
up on her brother. She didn't want to give up on Will.
She pulls the gun on Steve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and tells him get out, and then she starts the countdown, and it's
And Steve and Jonathan are like, whoa.
yeah, and the only thing that stops that from escalating between them is the lights coming on, and then Jonathan screaming, Nancy. She's the one who's in control of that room.
Yes.
Yeah. In a way that she probably never saw her mother be in control of anything, just to
Right.
bring it back to that.
How about the other characters? Do you see evolution or growth there?
Well, we
I
already
think
talked about
so,
Hopper.
like with
Yeah, I mean,
I'd say-
Hopper, I
well-
think that's he for me, he's really the hero of the story.
Yeah.
And we
Oh,
do
you
see him grow.
You also see Mike stepping into like more, I mean, he's trying to spark this relationship with this romantic thing with 11.
Mhm.
And
Here's-
that's
I-
something that nobody else was trying to do as of yet on that show.
I will disagree about Mike. Mike is a shit all the way through. If anything, he gets worse.
Well, maybe
My
I don't
Lord.
mean like he's growing like a Steve way, but he's like maybe maturing is the better
Okay.
word, or taking
Okay.
this, or trying like
He's hitting puberty is what he's doing.
progressing. Yeah, his hormones are on fire.
Okay.
And yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe not like, yeah,
He-
that's fair. It's
Okay.
not that he's like becoming a better or more interesting person. He's just hitting
Growing
he's hitting
physically.
the signposts of growth, of like
Aging.
physical growth.
Yeah.
You started to say something, Jay.
Oh, I was gonna say 11, because she goes from being so isolated and to a degree, almost no social skills or even
Mhm.
humanity to her, to being accepted into this group.
Yeah.
And then they're talking her through everything. And at the end, she's willing to sacrifice. She's willing to sacrifice
Mhm.
herself for these people that she's only known for what, a few months?
Not even like a
Not
week.
even that.
I was gonna say it's only there's only a few
Yeah.
days.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's like with her, it's like you see her go from the way that, Brenner was making her
Mhm.
this weapon, she becomes a person.
Yeah.
She doesn't have
Yeah.
all the bit, not
Mhm.
everything is fitting yet, but she's realizing that there are other people who matter.
Yeah. Friends don't lie.
Mm.
Yeah,
That
and
phrase comes back around.
like even her emotional her emoting, right, like changes significantly. Like she's
Yeah.
very, like straight faced and plain. And when she's fighting the Demogorgon in the end, I mean, you see not just anger, but there's, sadness and sort of desperation in her face, and we get to see her cry. So yeah, her becoming more human is huge.
And she feels responsible for the Demogorgon and what happened there, and she wants to
Yeah.
fix it.
What you just made me think of was Gilgamesh and Enkidu. She could be Enkidu. She's
Yeah.
being civilized and humanized,
Mm,
and then
yes.
sacrifices herself.
Yes.
Ooh, yeah, okay.
There you go.
All part of the
there's a
hero's
paper
journey
there.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just a few other things about this specific episode to mention. X-Men 134. So I don't know how many people caught this, but when 11 basically kills the Demogorgon, the way that it's presented on screen comes directly out of X-Men 134. This is the issue where we're first introduced to the Dark Phoenix. It's the same issue that's referenced in the very first episode. That's the one that Will wants when he's having this little contest with Dustin. In that issue, Dark Phoenix explores her powers, or comes into her powers for the first time, and punishes the character of Mastermind, who had been basically abusing her, by basically throwing him up against a wall with her powers. And it's presented in that sort of cruciform manner, going back to the archetypal imagery that we see with the Demogorgon. So X-Men makes a comeback. Fireball, we do learn that the Demogorgon is vulnerable to fire. So the fireball that Will failed to enact on his initial roll, that is what kills the Demogorgon, or hurts it quite a bit. The stuffed tiger, anyone pick up on that?
I saw it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I saw it.
the tiger
noticed
symbol has been coming back throughout the entire season. We see it in a poster on the basement wall. We see it in the school because the tiger is the school mascot.
Mhm.
And then both Will and 11 had stuffed tigers in their rooms. And
Sarah.
That's a thing. And we finally see it attached to Sarah because she had one when she was in the hospital.
The same one.
Yes.
The same stuffed tiger.
Yes. And so what do you think that means? Because this has been a symbol I've been looking at all season. I'm trying to figure out, what does this symbolize? I think it has something to do with childhood, because it's something which connects all the children in the story.
Calvin and Hobbes.
I go straight to the song, Eye of the Tiger, which doesn't help a lot. Which reminds me of Rocky, which also doesn't help a lot. But
well, I think the idea of the image of the tiger is it's fierce in some way, which is why it's the school mascot, I think. But yeah, it's something which does unify or connect all of the children characters here.
Stuffed animals like that, the teddy bear, the stuffed tiger, the stuffed, lion, the stuff, whatever, is, for lack of a better term, declawing the animal. So you are taking something that is actually a very legitimate threat, should you meet the reality of it, and turning it into something that is beloved, not just not a threat, but beloved, and a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? gives a sense of protection and safety. And I'm sure I can run that into something that happened on the episode, but I can't think of it right now.
That's something to think about.
Mm.
Illusions, we mentioned Lando and Yoda are referred to again. We get a final illusion in Anne of Green Gables, because that's the book that Hopper is reading to Sarah. And I'll admit, I've never read this. So if any of you have, if you can make a connection there, I just looked up a synopsis online, and it's about a girl who was adopted by an older brother and sister in order to work on their farm. And then it's about her adventures.
I haven't read it in 30 years. So,
Right.
Well, I
you
mean,
know, I don't remember.
it definitely could be looking forward to Hopper sort of adopting 11.
That's true.
And or the way that the boys have adopted 11 as part of their party. So the theme of adoption, I think that's the connection there.
Yeah.
But then again, like I said, I've never read the book, so there could be something deeper happening that I just don't know.
Yeah, that's the one of the things that kind of caught me. The line that he was reading was something about enjoy life now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's like, okay, as kids, you know, as we get older, we always think that being a child was the best time of our lives, because, you know, there's no bills, there's no jobs. You can basically do, you know, to a degree, you can do whatever you want with your days. But then there's always loss that's involved with it too. It's
Right.
like there's this idea that there's a loss of childhood and innocence, and you lose people that you love. But in the same sense, if you only concentrate on the negatives, then that's all your life is going to be.
Good
You
point.
know, and like with Hopper, you know, the idea that, okay, he lost his daughter, he lost his wife,
Yes.
he was self-destructing, and then there was something that, you know, the fact that Will disappears, the idea that he didn't want Joyce to go through the same pain that he did, and that transforms him throughout the series.
And Hopper is adopted in many ways the way 11 is by this other group. Okay, so maybe the story is actually about Hopper, not about 11 or anyone else.
Well,
Interesting.
or I mean,
yeah.
or Hopper and 11 are foils of one another, right? They are, you know, the mirror images, just coming from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
But there's so many similarities between the two.
The
Yeah,
theme of
that
duality
definitely-
coming up again.
That definitely makes sense.
And then the music in this episode, so we get Carol of the Bells and Bing Crosby's White Christmas. Of course, it's ending on Christmas, so that makes sense. But we also get Moby, When It's Cold, I'd Like to Die, which is one of the few instances in the show where they use music that's anachronistic.
It really took me by surprise. I didn't anticipate hearing a song from the 90s,
Right.
mid 90s in the middle of the show.
But it is effective in that particular scene.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So anything else anyone wants to add? That's all that I had, which is quite a lot, actually.
That's it. Yeah.
I guess so for now.
You know,
Yeah.
there's an element of the conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory throughout all of this that again becomes quite prevalent in the 80s when you
Yes.
look at again, going back to the Kennedy assassination. There's this wonderful and yet somewhat ridiculous series that the BBC does in the 80s called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And it is going through the entire conspiracy in like 6 episodes. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
It does feel like a thing made in the 80s when you're watching it, but it'll convince you for 5 minutes and then you go, okay, well, but you know, and that's also the time when people started getting into Roswell.
Yes.
And you have this increase in interest in the idea that the government's hiding things. And when you think about if any of those people that we see from this show, if they were trying to tell someone outside of Hawkins what was happening, they'd think they were a tinfoil hat,
Right.
you know? So that it's almost like a legitimizing of the conspiracy theory.
And just to sort of promote my own work a little bit more, the episode I did on Firestarter in relation to MK Ultra and how, in the 80s, the whole conspiracy theory aspect really started to gain ground because the government was hiding stuff nefarious stuff from its own people. Yes. Okay. Anything else to add? Okay.
Can't wait for season 2.
Neither can I. Kind of on that note, this is the end of the first season of this podcast. The next episode we do is going to be a bonus episode in which we play the Stranger Things Dungeons and Dragons game, The Hunt for the Thessal Hydra, which is the game that the boys are playing in the show. So,
Yeah.
okay. So, are there anything that you want to promote or plug?
I already mentioned my Star Trek podcast, Infinite Diversity. Also on that network, which is BQN, Jay and I have a twice weekly podcast called History with the Szilagys. And it's a little short tidbit of something in history. It's usually less than 10 minutes. So you can, stick it in your ears, commute or whatever. So listen to us there.
There you go. So thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Anytime. Thanks for listening, all of you out there. I very much appreciate you guys. So thank you. So until next time, take it easy, take care, and stay strange.
Stranger Things in the 1980s is produced by dreadpirateproductions. Cover art is by Sherry Archer. The theme music is Cobalt by Alex Bloxham, used under license from Filmstro. Send questions or topic suggestions to dreadpirateproductions@gmail.com.